All right, well, let's get going. My name's Jennifer Goodman. I'm the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance, and it's really great to have you as a participant in this virtual gathering presented by the New Hampshire Preservation Alliance. We're the statewide nonprofit membership-based organization, as most or all of you know. This gathering is part of our ongoing and expanding work to provide practical information to people like you. We've done over 30 since the pandemic started on a whole range of topics, and we're tracking and adapting as we go. We've had the opportunity to kind of step back with colleagues and discuss critical issues like the health of main streets, how to protect landscape scale resources, and sort of gotten into the weeds in a good way to talk about old house repair, drier basements, healthier houses, and how to strategies around saving and reviving and reusing community landmarks, sort of our bread and butter. Today's topic is about how Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act is used to inform historic resource decision-making in towns and cities across the state. This group of you, love that you're here with us, and I think you're from all over the Granite State, which is fabulous, all different kinds of perspectives. I think we have agency representatives, community leaders, property owners, consultants working on different parts of these kinds of projects. So it's great to have these perspectives and different voices that totally relate to this 106 kind of process and products. And the goal really is to hopefully everybody leaves with some new ideas, new perspectives, a dose of inspiration in terms of work related to 106 and other historic preservation activities. Really want to thank everybody who's a member or supporter of the Preservation Alliance's work. If you're not yet, please consider a donation or a gift in somebody's honor. Most of our dollars for day-to-day operations come from people like you and makes a real difference. We've been dealing with old and new challenges during the pandemic, and every dollar is used to help make more preservation happen on the ground across the state. Just a few housekeeping items. We are recording this session, as we let you know in our confirmation email. We ask that you stay muted for that reason so there isn't background noise. We've got a great audience today, a sizable one, so I think we'll mostly use the chat function for questions and comments, which we'll do mostly at the end of the session. So think about your questions and comments as you go, and we'll make sure to ask for those, and I'll do my best to help the panel to synthesize those questions and make sure they get to the panel so we can have that part of the productive discussion as well. We're pleased to be partnering with the Division of Historical Resources, who are sort of our public sector sisters in this work across the state. Nadine Miller is here, the Deputy Historic Preservation Officer. She's gonna lead off with an overview of Section 106. Also take your questions during the session about process or specific projects in your community. Then we're gonna hear from Lynn Emerson Monroe, Principal at Preservation Company, who's got a great consulting firm that's done work on the case study we're going to hear about, as well as a great portfolio of projects over time. And she's going to be presenting along with Brooke Kenline Neiman, who's the Cultural Resource Specialist for Eversource Energy and a professional archaeologist. I added up the years that the panel has spent in historic preservation in New Hampshire and other places along with mine. And I think if we were an old building, we'd be late Italianate or early shingle style. That's the scope of years that we represent together. I would say that this panel have long substantial histories in terms of doing great cultural resource and historic preservation work. Also say, I think the panelists are always looking for the next innovation, looking for the next new strategy to really help carry historic preservation forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nadine to get us started.
Great. It's great to see so many familiar faces and new faces. I'm going to put the share screen on and get that started. It should just take a second. Here we go. And we will go here. Let's see. There we go. Everybody can see that, I hope. So we are just really excited to be here today to share the Section 106 process. It's something that is really dear to me. I've worked in the field in Section 106 for 30 years in 2021. And some people aren't really excited about the topic, but I think there's so much to learn. And as we were talking right before everybody got started, we can point to so many successful projects, and even the ones that are not really a success, we can learn from them. We wanted to share the Seacoast Reliability Project, which is the case study toward the end of our discussion, because we felt as a team it was just a good snapshot of how Section 106 can be positive, that there might be some infrastructure projects or other types of projects that might pose a concern to a community, but working through the process really brings about some positives. And we wanted to highlight those as part of this particular discussion. So we're calling it Section 106 in action. And you can see here some images of projects that include transmission lines and wind turbine projects, and projects we worked for with lead abatement and housing programs. So there's so many different programs we've worked with. As I mentioned, the Division of Historical Resources, we review more than 1,000 projects every year that we've been tracking those. It's hard to believe, but sometimes they're very, very small, very easy to get comments out, and some certainly take a lot more time. And we review these under Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, which was established in 1966. So we are 55 years into that wonderful law that I think has made a big impact on the nation. We also review projects under a state law called RSA 227C9, where we work with our state agency partners in a similar process. And I highlighted the balsams because this is such an amazing resource that is so fragile at the moment. But we had been working with the Corps and the applicants on this one, and we'll see how that project moves forward. So what Section 106 is, it's any federally funded, permitted, or licensed project for a federal agency that requires consideration of how those undertakings might impact historic resources. And when we say historic resources, we're talking both above ground and archaeological resources and cultural landscapes. And what Section 106 strives to do is to try and find ways to avoid impacting those resources. If they can't be avoided, how to change the design to minimize impacts. And then again, if it can't be completely minimized, to find ways to mitigate, to give back to the public for the loss of the resource. And again, the Seacoast Reliability Project is one where we had all three of these avoid, minimize, and mitigate. And we don't always see that in Section 106. So again, we were excited about highlighting that particular project. And Section 106 is really consultative in nature. We at the DHR are actually very pleased when we get public comments and interest in particular projects. And we always feel that just leads to greater decision making at the local level. You know, in the Northern Pass project several years ago, we had more than 50 folks who had registered as what we call consulting parties, we can talk about later, and just the general public. And I think that strengthened that particular project and others. So Section 106 is a 4-process step. And number 1 is initiate the process. And this in our state is often done by an applicant working with a federal agency, whether it's for permitting or, as we mentioned, through funding or licensing. Some states won't initiate 106 without the federal agency actually taking the absolute lead. But within our state, we do work directly with a lot of folks through our process, and they coordinate with the lead federal agency. And we often hear from them if there are adverse effects or other reasons to work directly with that federal agency. So we'll start with number 1, the initiation of Section 106. And remember, it's because of federal funding, licensing, or permitting. And at this point in time, we may not even know that there are historic resources in a project area. That's not what triggers 106. What triggers it is this federal involvement. So what is a federal undertaking? Again, we'd mentioned it's funding. It can be other sorts of non-financial assistance from a federal agency, like cell tower projects and things like that. And I do want to reiterate, because again, this is a misconception by a lot of folks, but it is the lead federal agency who is the primary decision maker in Section 106, who really runs the process. They delegate a lot. They take into account the State Historic Preservation Office's concerns and rely on our office considerably in the evaluation of historic properties and assessing of effects. But it really is that agency's responsibility. And we'll get a lot of calls from folks saying, do I have to go through the 106 process? This is my project. And I always say that that is not a decision for our office to make. We would advise you to contact your person with the federal agency to determine whether or not it's necessary, because we don't want to say one way or the other and have a problem there. So who participates in 106? There's a federal agency called the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation in DC, and they have quite a large staff who assists in all things Section 106. They have a great website, achp.gov, that I would recommend going to if you're more interested in the Section 106 process. They have a handbook, a citizen's guide on how to participate, and many other technical documents. And they have staff liaisons, and they really can be involved at the very early stages of a large project, but often they're consulted at the end of a project, just as a heads up for federal agencies, particularly if there's an adverse effect. And we work with them in that capacity. Federal agencies all have agency officials or historic preservation officers that we often work with. The State Historic Preservation Office, our office at the Division of Historical Resources, and every state has one. There can be tribal historic preservation officers. In New Hampshire, we don't have any federally recognized tribes who are actually located in the state, although we do work with tribes who have an interest in Native American concerns here. They, in the past, had tribes who lived here thousands of years ago and still have an interest. There are other consulting parties that could be nonprofits, the Forest Society, the Preservation Alliance, local governments, whether it's the town or city itself, or working through their Historic District Commission or Heritage Commission, or they could be a certified local government, which we have 25 in our state that we work closely with. Applicants themselves, and certainly the public, even if they're not associated with any of these larger organizations. As I mentioned, the Advisory Council is an independent federal agency, and their main charge is implementing Section 106, assisting federal agencies in that role. They get involved with complex cases and can be very helpful. And we work with them on programmatic agreements and other memorandum of agreements at the end. And they do provide great training and guidance. They have some free webinars on their website right now, and I would really encourage you to check those out because they're really helpful. And federal agencies, the Division of Historical Resources, we work with at least 75 different federal agencies on these types of projects. Some of the big ones you probably know are, our federal highways through DOT, or aviation or railroads. The Army Corps of Engineers is a big one we work with, and HUD. But there's also Small Business Administration, USDA, and Rural Development, and FERC with licensing of dams. So all kinds of federal agencies, and they all have their own way of interpreting Section 106. And our state really tries to, honor working with those different processes, even though it may not always be as consistent as we would like, but we certainly try and make it a success every time. So who we are is the Division of Historical Resources. There are 11 of us in the office right now. Well, most of us are working from home, but we still touch base as much as we can. And so not only do we have this regulatory role under Section 106, And in that capacity, as the deputy SHPO, I run that program. And we have Marika Labash, who is the coordinator who receives all of the materials that come in, and she works on our database and she keeps us in line because we typically have 30 days to respond to any incoming Section 106 materials. We want to be always very, very quick to respond. And we have like a less than a week response time usually, and we are really, really proud of that. And then we have David Truby, who's our archaeologist within Section 106 Review and Compliance, and Laura Black, who reviews the highway programs and transportation type projects. But you're probably familiar with us for other reasons, particularly the National Register program. We have the State Register. Our highway marker program is very successful. We provide grants, preservation planning, and certainly we have archaeology. And in the summers, we run our SCRAP program, which has volunteer opportunities for folks. And I know that SCRAP this year, we're doing a work in Bear Brook State Park and Pillsbury State Park. And our archaeologist, Mark Doporowski, is getting that material out as we speak. So if people are interested in that volunteer opportunity, we're hoping it's back up, using COVID safe guidelines for people to actually be out in the field this summer. So consulting parties, I mentioned those earlier. Those are organizations that may want to take a special role in Section 106 review. It's sort of a beeline to being able to review the products that come out of it and help with some of the decision-making process with the federal agency. And it is the federal agency's purview to decide who can be a consulting party. But usually if there's a strong interest in the organization to historic resources, it's not a problem, but there is a formal request process that usually needs to take place. And as I'd said, we always at the DHR welcome as many consulting parties who have an interest and who want to participate. It just makes it stronger in the end. So throughout Section 106, federal agencies have to consider the views of the public early in the process. They just have to take into account their concerns. They don't necessarily have to implement everything the public says, but they certainly have to show that they've taken into account their concerns and tried to find ways to avoid or minimize harm to historic properties. So these are the opportunities where you might find to attend public meetings. Some of these public meetings have become virtual during COVID. They're usually advertised in newspapers, on websites. Again, our office, the Alliance, can help if you have a concern. Are you aware of any sort of public opportunities for us? Call us, give us an email. We're happy to work with you guys on that. So now we're at number 2, where we are identifying historic properties. Certainly there are some cases where you can initiate the process and the agency determines that it's really not an undertaking and you're going to be done. Buying school books or something using federal money would not be an undertaking, so we wouldn't have to go through the process. But if the agency determines that you do have to go through, really the next step is to identify historic properties. And doing that, we ask the applicant to send in to our office a form called a request for project review form. It's available on our website. We have a review and compliance section on our website. And there's instructions and a manual, and it's providing us with the basic information about your project. It's asking you to look at our database that we now have online of our historic resources so we can see if properties have been previously identified, and gives us a chance to respond back as to what the next steps are. Many times we'll respond back that there's no next steps, you're done, there's no historic properties affected, and that's wonderful. But sometimes we may ask for some additional work. In all projects, we're looking to have the area of potential effects defined. Certainly in bigger projects, this is an example of one of the wind turbine projects where we work with the Army Corps and the applicant to identify a 3-mile area of potential effect and a larger 5-mile area to have professional consultants look at to see whether there may be some visual effects. But even the smallest project that might just involve lead abatement for one particular property, that's the property that would be the area of potential effects. Those are the places where there could be changes to a resource, or where we have to investigate to see if there are any resources in that area before we can move forward. So identifying historical properties is that next step in 106. And usually we're almost always asked that qualified professionals would be hired to conduct field work, research, and analysis. This is usually when an architectural historian that's qualified under federal guidelines or archaeologist as well might reach out to an organization to help gather information about the history and significance of local resources, because usually the local organization, historical society, heritage, historic district commission, you know the most about your resources, and it's really helpful for someone from the outside to come in and seek that guidance from the town or the local organization. But here are some types of resources that we typically find. It's not just your high style sort of Queen Anne house, but it can also be very working class neighborhoods. It can be dams and culverts and railroads and archaeological sites, town halls, many types of resources, stone walls. We see all kinds, and that's what makes it really exciting. The types of documents that we may request during this early phase, professionally done, would be an archaeological sensitivity assessment, which can be asked periodically if our archaeologist, Dave Truby, looks at some mapping in the area and says, I wonder if there might be some Native American or European sensitivity here, and it might be impacted by the project. So this is more of a research tool, a desktop type of study where the archaeologist will go out and do some ground truthing, but they won't do any digging here. And then we get this report, and it may show that there is potential for finding archaeological resources, Native American and such. And then David may ask for more of an intensive survey where they're going out and digging holes. And then if they do find work and we're still having to do additional survey, there's a phase 2 and a phase 3. So archaeology is pretty intense, and it's very technical and scientific. We also, for above ground resources, for big projects, we utilize project area forms. And these are large documents that show what are the resources that are already present in the area, what sort of themes, what might we find in the area that would help us base our understanding of these resources on. So in New Hampshire, we see a lot of agriculture as a theme, recreation as a theme, certainly transportation. And our office has a whole list of historic contexts that resources can be linked to, and that helps us in decision making. And then there may be individual inventory forms that are asked for individual houses or farms, or larger historic district areas that could be a village or a rural setting where we're looking at multiple resources. And again, the Seacoast Reliability Project, Lynn is going to talk about some of the types of survey documents they used and the resources that they found, because they cover a whole gambit of property types. But what is a historic resource? It's going to be based on the National Register of Historic Places definition. We use the National Register as our guideline under Section 106, even though we have a state register of historic places, and we do appreciate knowing those resources. Until they're determined either eligible or listed for the National Register, we don't consider those as part of 106, because state register is purely honorary. But it could be a district, a site, a building, a structure, or an object, and it has to be significant in the history or architecture, engineering, archaeology, culture of the state or its communities, or even the nation. So just something that's old doesn't necessarily mean that it's considered a historic resource, but we're looking at buildings and resources now that date from 1971 and back. And there are all kinds of mid-century resources right now that people wouldn't think are historic that we're defining as historic. And I find that very exciting, because I think it just opens up a whole plethora of resource types that we were not familiar with. And Lynn's company has been doing some great work on identifying these 20th century resources. So for, like I said, Section 106, historic resources are defined as those that are eligible for or listed in the National Register. So these properties don't already have to be listed or on a list or in a list or at the federal government. Sometimes they have never been identified before. And so that's what this process is. And using trained folks to do this is really important, because you can't just hire anyone off the street or even have an architect do it. There's very specific skills to be able to assess resources. For big projects, sometimes we use these viewshed maps. I think we did this for the Seacoast, where we might have a very large area of the area of potential effects, maybe a half a mile or a mile from the center line of a project. And companies can use technology to make a determination as to, based on landscape and terrain, what areas might be visible from this turbine or transmission line or cell tower or whatever it might be. And in this case, we work together with the applicant and their consultants and the town to try and identify those resources really only in that view shed, or only the resources that might be physically impacted. We can't expect that every single resource out there will be investigated fully. The advisory council doesn't require that, but certainly a good faith effort to identify these resources so that they're not going to be impacted by the project. And as I mentioned earlier, cultural landscapes is something that we've been really promoting in New Hampshire, because we recognize that our state is really tied so much to nature and to the natural environment as well as the built environment. And we feel that looking at our landscape more broadly, not just the buildings or not just the landscape or just the archaeology, we try and look at this layered kind of through the lens of a cultural geographer. And the cultural landscape studies can often utilize many team members like ethnographers, archaeologists, oral historians, and it pulls together a broader picture of the landscape. So that's something we've actually been excited about doing more of. So once a consultant, at least for the above ground, completes these forms, they go to our determination of eligibility committee, and that meets twice monthly on Wednesday, every other Wednesday, the first or second and fourth Wednesday, actually. And it's the architectural historians in the office, and we review these forms, and we have some great conversations about the resources, and we determine whether or not we concur with the consultant's recommendations that they're eligible or not eligible. And that's always very helpful. We just had one this morning, and we look at state register properties here, section 106 properties, technical assistance. We're seeing all kinds of things. So again, with archaeology, it's our archaeologist who utilizes those reports, and they make decisions as to whether or not resources from an archaeological standpoint could be eligible. After we've identified and we know what our historic properties are, and again, we're making sure that the agency is involving the public in these decision-making steps, we have the next step, which is assessing adverse effects. So we have to know enough about a project at this phase to determine whether or not it really will have some sort of impact to a property. And there are multiple ways that projects can impact a property. It could be physical destruction or damage of property, but it could also be the introduction of visual or atmospheric or audible elements that could change the character of the property. And that's what we're looking for. Is it changing the physical characteristics of the property, or even the property setting that make it significant? And again, it's up to the federal agency to work on this, but they utilize our information significantly. And if we disagree, we go back and forth with that. We love it when visual simulations are submitted to us for these sorts of assessment documents. And again, not every single project we get will have these tools and utilize this. But when there are big projects like these with the turbines, I think it really helps to show the original situation and how those turbines would be introduced into a landscape. And in this case, we felt this was an adverse effect because it changes the setting of the lake, which was significant for camp properties. Again, consulting parties are always welcome, especially during this phase, and public meetings are usually held by the federal agencies at the local level for assessing effects. So we try and avoid these impacts as much as possible by moving the project or lowering the size of the turbines or towers so that they can't be visible. And we're doing that during the avoidance phase. We're also trying to minimize impacts sometimes by maybe using colors for cell tower use, and so that it might blend into the landscape better so you don't see it, those sorts of things. But when we can't find ways to minimize or avoid, we have to go into the resolution of adverse effects. And this is where the federal agency has to notify the advisory council to kind of give them a heads up, ask if they want to participate. And we try and work together with the applicant, the town, the public to come up with some creative mitigation tools. to resolve those effects. In the past, it used to always be things like documenting properties, which is fine, but we've really tried to become more creative. We also have to work with the federal agency to codify these agreements. And usually it's in the form of a memorandum of agreement that we sign with the federal agency, sometimes partners such as a state agency if they're using grant monies. And this is helpful because once the agreement document is signed, then the applicant can move forward with their project without necessarily having all of those mitigation stipulations met yet. They usually have 3 to 5 years to complete that process, but they're at this point given their certificate or permit, whatever they need, or funding to move forward. On really big projects, we've utilized programmatic agreements, which really kind of lay out conditions and future ways of handling projects into the future. So those are 2 tools, but we mostly use MOAs. And here are just some generalized mitigation examples that I've been proud of in the past. Certainly the kiosks and interpretive signs have been great, especially if there's a public viewing area or park nearby. The Rumney Library I thought was a really great success because this was part of the wind turbine project there years ago. And there was some grant monies made available to the towns that were impacted, and the library needed handicapped accessibility. And they were actually able to use that money to hire designers and consultants to build an addition on the back that had an elevator and handicapped accessibility, but still meeting the Secretary of the Interior standards so it wouldn't impact the character of the library. Archaeology is a good mitigation tool if necessary, if you can't avoid that site. Sometimes we do walking tours, videos, booklets. So we're going to show you some with the Seacoast Reliability Project. And I'm going to transfer this over to Brooke right now because she's going to give a quick overview of the Seacoast project, and then she and Lynn will talk more about the resources identified and how we kind of work together with the assessment of effects.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So like Nadine said, my name is Brooke Henley-Nyman. I'm the Cultural Resource Specialist for Eversource Energy. Thanks to everyone for attending. It's a real pleasure to be here with this group and to present the project with Lynn Monroe from Preservation Company, who, along with our wonderful team, played a really pivotal role in identifying and evaluating a lot of the above ground resources for the project. And she'll definitely speak to that in a little bit. But first, I wanted to introduce you to our case study project, which is the Seacoast Reliability Project. Nadine, could you move the slide forward?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Eversource proposed the Seacoast Reliability Project, which we'll refer to as SRP. It's a new 115 kilovolt transmission line between the Madbury and Portsmouth substation that was really in response to the increased population growth and energy demands of the Seacoast. SRP is approximately 12.9 miles long and includes a combination of overhead, underground, and underwater components. It travels along our existing electric utility corridors and traverses portions of the towns of Madbury, Durham, Newington, and the city of Portsmouth, including a submarine cable crossing from Durham to Newington under Little Bay. Nadine, do you mind moving back to the first slide? So here's a map of the project. The stars are the Madbury and Portsmouth substations. The blue line segments, those represent the above ground cables and structures. The kind of pink or purplish line segments, those are areas where the transmission line was undergrounded. And what we mean by undergrounding is we're replacing those overhead lines and structures with buried cables. They're typically contained within a duct bank. And then the kind of lime green portion that traverses Little Bay, that's the submarine cable. And in that portion, a jet plow actually helped to bury a submarine cable somewhere between 3.5 and about 5 feet below the base of the bay. Nadine, could you move forward? Could you go back one?
Yep.
Thank you. So state and federal environmental review was required for the project, including the need for a certificate from the New Hampshire State Evaluation Committee and a permit from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. These environmental reviews consisted of not only a consideration of impacts to cultural resources, but a host of other items, including natural and scenic resources. And for this conversation, it should be noted that this is a fairly large project and not all undertakings rise to this level of complexity. But the project really does serve as an excellent case study to illustrate the steps involved in the Section 106 process. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so as Nadine noted earlier, once the APE has been established, the next step is to identify historic properties within these boundaries. For this project, 2 general property types were identified, including above ground resources such as historic districts and standing structures that are typically identified and evaluated by architectural historians, and below ground or archaeological resources that are identified and evaluated by archaeologists. For this particular project, professional consultants, including Preservation Company and Victoria Bunker, helped identify the above and below ground resources. Local organizations such as the Newington Historic District Commission, the Durham Historic District and Heritage Commission, and the Durham Historic Association also provided valuable insight and information on the resources. So for the archaeological resources, the APE was set as the entire corridor. And as I mentioned previously, the corridor is about 12.9 miles long and about 100 feet wide. Approximately 156 acres was subjected to archaeological investigations, including sensitivity assessments and survey. 2 principal archaeological resources were identified as a result of the effort, including a historic granite quarry, which is a surface quarry that featured evidence of the plug and feather technique for splitting and suggests a post-1830 occupation. And then we also had a late 18th century to early 19th century residential site, which featured a really beautiful cellar hole. Next slide. All right, now, and I'll pass it over to Lynn Monroe from Preservation Company to talk about the above ground resources.
Make sure you take yourself off mute, Lynn. There you go.
Needed that, thank you. And that would be me. I wanted to say the first part that's interesting is that the entire project is an historic resource. You're using an existing transmission line that started in 1902. So everything from the beginning was, and it was a kind of exciting line because it did go underwater, which was pretty new in those days. So what happens when somebody calls and says, okay, we've got this really, this 13-mile long area, and we want you to look at all of this. It's big to start with. So we don't get to work within the corridor. We get to work with a mile wide corridor, 13 miles long, about 9,000 acres. So that's the area we were beginning to figure out. Yes, exactly. Thank you, cursor. Those are parcels. Those are the individual parcels along the corridor. The red is the line, and then there's the whole mile thing. So you usually begin with something wonderful that is at DHR, a resource that hasn't been mentioned yet today, which is Emmett. And that has all the previous survey, anything that has been surveyed, or at least almost everything that's been surveyed. Some of our surveys are so old, they haven't made it there yet. But anyway, everything that's been surveyed already is right there online, and you can become members and look on this incredible resource yourselves. So that's a plug for Emmett. So we go to Emmett, and then we mapped all the parcels going through, through the town records. And so we mapped every parcel that was pre-1968 in this 9,000 acres. That's a lot. I'm just trying to show you how vast this was to begin with. And when we set out on the project area form, we had 23 historic areas, which ranged inside from 2 to 100 buildings. Those were districts or areas that were being evaluated as districts, and 174 individual properties that did not fall within those areas. We did viewshed maps, which Nadine showed you, that helped us, and some modeling. We worked extensively with Google Earth. Google Earth is just one of the most wonderful resources when you're doing this kind of thing. You can go down into Street View, you can model things from different places. They really are, it's really a great resource. And so we did a lot of that. We used a lot of technology, in other words, to understand the relationship of the resource to the line, to the corridor. And that that helped us. So then we did, that brought it down in the project area form. We were able to winnow it down. This is a whole winnowing thing, and to say that, and so in review, when DHR reviewed the project area form, they agreed that we should do survey for 5 historic districts and 3 individual properties, and 3 historic districts and 2 individual properties that had already been surveyed. We had to look at again. So those were already in there. So really new things were only 5 historic districts and 3 individual properties. Pretty amazing, but we're coming down again. So then the determination of eligibility process took place that you've just heard about. And then we worked with visual simulations, which are more intense. I'll show you some examples in a minute, more intense ways of looking. Well, it's sort of like that wind farm that you looked at a moment ago. It's visual simulations to understand, again, the relationship of the project to the resource. So we have now established which resources are eligible for the National Register and which ones will be affected. And so then we prepared something called effects tables, which weren't in that Nadine's talk just now, but it's another winnowing tool that it discusses, lots of discussion on how the project affects the resource. And those were prepared for 7 historic districts and 4 individual properties. And out of that, we came to 3 districts that had potential for adverse effect, and 1 individual properties. That's amazing, I think, when we start with this vast number. I think Section 106, I've worked in Section 106 where, well, almost as long as the Preservation Act, not quite, it's been there. And it's amazing how it works. It really works. And that's my message for the day is it really works. By really going through this process and looking at things, a project is improved, wonderful things happen, and good things happen, as the thing we'll get to. So we've got 3 districts and 1 individual property that were cited as having adverse effects after all of this process. And then there's mitigation for that. So we'll go to another slide. And these are the resources that we inventoried, either with individual inventory forms or area forms, district forms, and to make determinations of National Register eligibility, affectionately called DOEs. In those 5 historic districts, I was just going to mention a couple of them. That's the list. You can all see where you're there. And I was going to mention that this is so wonderful. We get to see some of these great different resources. We had to do an historic district area form for the University of New Hampshire, which had never been done before. And that thing is vast. I mean, it's not just the resources on Main Street that you're all used to. It's all the outlying properties, and UNH has a lot of them. So it was a really big historic district, and the university was kind of excited to help us and work with us on that. We worked with lots of wonderful individual things. The big, the most exciting in a way was the Little Bay Cable and Terminal Houses Historic District, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and show you pictures, because that's the underwater crossing of this project. We looked at Newing Center Historic District was already listed. Several places in wonderful farms in Newington were part of this. And one unusual resource was Gosling Meadows Historic District in Portsmouth, which was mid-20th century urban renewal. When they were building Strawberry Bank and doing a lot of urban renewal in downtown Portsmouth, they built this worker housing out almost on the Newington border, but it was within the APE, and so we got to survey that too. So lots of interesting things. Slide, please. Okay, Brooke.
All right, it's me again. All right, so once resources are identified and before final effects are evaluated, there's typically an opportunity to retool the project in an effort to avoid or minimize effects to the significant properties through project design. For SRP, some of those measures included using weathering steel structures, which if you're not familiar with those are the structures that look dark brown, almost a dark rust-like appearance that really help reduce the visibility of the poles and to better blend into the landscape. Rerouting access roads and shifting structure locations to avoid specific resources, and using protective measures such as timber matting to avoid damages to arc sites and stone walls. Undergrounding portions of the line also acted to reduce the visual impacts of the project on the resources as well.
Next slide.
No,
Oh.
wait a sec. I don't know where Brooke went, but anyway,
Oh, yeah.
the undergrounding was used in Newington and at UNH. But what I wanted to point out was the Mooney Cemetery. This was part of the. This is in Durham, right near the road. So you've probably driven near it many times. Everybody, it's the main road from Newmarket to Durham. 150 something. Anyway, what the arrow points to is the existing structure. That's the existing. Remember, this is an existing corridor, so that's an existing transmission tower, and it was right there. And then when leaf off season, it's towering over the Mooney Cemetery. With the new project, we were able to place the new structure out of view of the cemetery in any way, thereby actually improving. One of the things one of my favorite phrases in the world is always leave your campsite better than you found it. And I feel in many ways this project was able to do that. And that's, who'd have thought, when you start this process, because of Section 106, you're able to really literally make it better. So this made it better for the new Mooney Cemetery. That's like,
Okay.
Sorry. And this is to mention visual simulations. The small one up there is the before. It's the existing conditions. And what's interesting about these existing conditions is look at all the stuff that's around there. There are vast parking lots on each side. This is the depot at UNH, the dairy bar. Probably you know it as more readily. But anyway, it's you can see all kinds of light standards and different things. The air is very active there. And then with this visual simulation, those arrows point to what the new structures would look like. Right, good, perfect. We decided this was really not an effect because it's just a little more of the same of what was already there. So that's the way the visual simulation helps. Next. And here's another example of visual simulations, and this is in the Newington Historic District, the Darius Frink Farm, which is that beautiful brick house there. And the before, I can't help pointing, sorry. The before picture shows that's the existing transmission line, when that's the project that is being replaced now. And then the visual simulation for showing it about as what was planning to be were two much taller structures with lines going across. This is going across the fields that as you come to the Newington Historic District, this is what greets you, these beautiful fields leading to the Darius Frink Farm. And then you come into the center of Newington. So you can see that was going to be an adverse effect for sure, coming across like that. But the wonders of technology, they were able to actually bury the lines. And so it all went underground here and creating some new field. It hasn't grown, as you can see, it hasn't grown up quite to be like all the other grass, but it will very shortly. And it's you can, and if you look, we're looking directly down the corridor there. I'm pointing right down the corridor, and you'll see it's only visible when you're looking exactly down the corridor. If I drive 10 feet or so either way, you can't see it. It's below tree line, it's dark, the color of the trees, and so the project just vanishes. So this is another case in which I feel like the project left the town center better than it found it. Next. However, not all effects could be resolved, and that brings us to the effects tables. And we came to the adverse effects on the Newmarket and Bennett roads, and that was for stone walls. And the Durham Point Historic District, same thing, the crossing stone walls, and those were mitigated. Brooke can probably speak better to this, but Brooke, you better speak to that.
What were we speaking about? The stone walls?
The stone walls in Newmarket and Bennett roads and Durham Point Historic Districts.
Sure, there was kind of a 4-method approach to try to avoid impacts to them. and to try to manage access around them. Those were avoiding using existing breaches. There were already some existing breaches within the stone walls, tracing back to the kind of original construction or maintenance and operation of the old line, because as we said, it's a very old distribution line, as well as some air bridging techniques, which is using timber matting to basically bridge or to build a bridge over the stone wall and then to have the equipment move over that.
Perfect. And then two other effects, adverse effects that weren't able to be resolved were the Little Bay Cable and Terminal House Historic District in Durham and Newington. I'll be talking about that in just a second. And the Alfred Pickering Farm in Newington, where the design was not able to make it invisible to the farm.
And this was a little more complicated than some, because we had a couple of different agreement documents, because we were working with the Site Evaluation Committee and with the Army Corps of Engineers. So again, that's not so normal, but I think we worked out a successful way to codify the mitigation of these resources, which Lynn will show in a minute.
And just as Lynn gets to her last two examples, just audience, think about questions you have and feel free to stick them in the chat. Back to you, Lynn. Thank you for your two great examples.
Next slide.
Okay, this is about the most fun thing ever. These are the Little Bay Underwater Cable Terminal Houses Historic District. There was one on the Durham side and one on the Newington side. In Newington, it is on private property, and it's where it is, and we weren't able to influence that directly. But this and the project was not going to. It was rooted, so it would not come near it. But this one was right in. If I had taken. If you could see the photograph to the right, you can't, but it's anyway, that's the line coming to the shore. And that's where the historic line came through, and that's where the new one does. And so the first step, it had to be moved, which is coming. But anyway, the first step was to document it. And we did what's called a historic American engineering record documentation, which involved there's our photographer taking special pictures and very careful digital measured drawings and a very thorough write-up of the history and documentation of the buildings of the district. And that's placed in the Historic American Engineering Record. And then in order to, it had to see how close it is to the shore. It was right in the path of everything. So it had to be moved. And this building, did we ever figure out how much it weighed? It's
a lot.
A lot, exactly. But we had the master mover here, Arnold Grayton Associates. Arnold Grayton himself came and moved this fella last summer and picked it up and put it on rails and moved it aside. And then after the work was done, moved it back into place again. And I guess we'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, and the reason that it had to be moved for construction is that there was a pre-existing cable that went under the bay, to which the cable house was associated with. So in order to put the new cable in, which we wanted to use that kind of same area to avoid any other kind of impacts to natural resources, we had to move it during construction and then move it back.
And again, that cable was from 1902. That's when the cable houses were built, the transmission house. And so after it was moved back into place and a new foundation that looked just like the old foundation, and in fact used the old stones on a new foundation. And then we brought in a conservator, Stephen Mallory worked with us, and Rick Irons and Richard Irons worked, masons and carpenters from York, Maine, worked on this. We tented it because it was getting cold by the time we could work on it. Brooke was going to tell you, but I'll tell you that there was an eagle having little eagle nearby, and we had to wait until little eagle could fledge and fly away before we could start the building process. And it was getting cold by that time, so we had to put everything under a tent, and it was absolutely wonderful how the masons were able to work and get the project done during that time. And there it is, all shiny and new. So this is, again, a wonderful example of leaving its campsite better than it found it. This building is uh, very safe for another many hundred years, I hope. And there were for displays, we did the panel that you see, Transmitting Power, discusses that, and it has actual real cable chunks. Those things that you're seeing in the middle there, those are actually chunks of the historic cables. The smallest ones being the early ones from 1902, 1920, 1948, 1970, and 1919. Those are that's on the newest ones. So you can see the evolution of cable design as well. And talking about the transmitting power is the way the electricity was brought. This original project was so significant, bringing electricity to the Seacoast to power primarily the interurban system, the trolley cars that went everywhere to Hampton Beach and Canopy Lake Park and all kinds of wonderful things. So this was a great project to work on. We loved every bit of it, and it's so many interesting things. And 106 always does that. We've worked on so many 106 projects, I can't count them, but it always is that kind of process, and it's exciting to see it. It's something that looks terrifying in the beginning. Oh, why, there was one more, thank you. And about that farm. Yes, the Newington Farms book. It doesn't look like so much on a slide, so I don't know if you can see me, but if you can, I'm holding one up. And it's this really wonderful book of historic photographs and the evolution of farming in Newington. And Kari is on the line here, Kari LaPrey, who was the prime author on that. So for us, that was great, but many people worked on it. And we worked with a wonderful design team of Bailey Donovan. I should plug them because they did the displays, and they also worked on the book. So
and these have been distributed to the state library and to a lot of local organizations if people are interested in looking at it.
Yes, and the town of Newington.
That's
yes.
Fabulous. Ready for
questions?
Woohoo! I think, well, I love the leaving the campsite better analogy, and Nadine, great overview, and thinking about how folks can engage. Brooke, thank you as well. We had a couple of questions that brought up, maybe, I don't know who wants to handle this, maybe Nadine first, sort of the difference and overlap between 106 process and the process that the site evaluation committee uses. Brooke mentioned at the beginning that both were in play for the Seacoast Reliability Project. Nadine, do you want to take that and just help people understand that a little bit?
Well, site evaluation committee is really for energy and transmission type projects. So the Northern Pass was one that went through there, and the wind farm projects and other and things like that have gone through that. So not every project needs to go through site evaluation committee, and it's a very thorough process. And I'd say it's really even more thorough than Section 106 because they're just looking at such a large body of resources. And so our office is sort of parallel working within that site evaluation committee, but through the Section 106 process. So the applicant really falls on them to present even more information and hire a lot of professionals, and there's testimony and hearings regarding that particular project that can go on for many months. It's very thorough, and the committee is set up with appointed folks from lots of different state agencies, and they actually have the power to stop projects if they feel that it doesn't meet the requirements that are laid out in their rules. I think it's a great process, and I think it's been beneficial to the balancing energy with the environment. But there haven't really been too many large projects since Seacoast recently.
Good. Thank you for that. There's a specific question. People were congratulating the team on the products and asking, where is the cable history display? Is that Town of Newington Historical Society physically? Where is that going to be? Where can we visit the exhibit?
Town of Newington. Yeah, go ahead, Brooke.
Yep. Oh, I was going to say there are two identical displays. One is in the town offices of the Town of Newington, and the other one is in the Town Hall of Durham. So there are two locations, and they're really cool.
Great.
very cool.
I I just wondered, Nadine, you talked a little bit about consulting parties and folks access through that. And I feel like you talked about local historical societies and towns. Individuals can also seek consulting party status, correct? Outside of just going to a public meeting, you can actually petition for that tighter connection
Right.
status. True?
Yeah, a letter, a person would want to write a letter to the federal agency and explaining how they have a connection through concerns about historic properties, whether they're archaeology or above ground or landscape, and the federal agency will decide. But usually most federal agencies are conservative and would like to incorporate everyone's point of view if they're able to. So people are usually invited to attend.
Good.
Mhm.
Quick follow-up. Whoops. Will the displays have hands-on pieces of cable for people to touch? And tribes was another question. We'll do it. I know we're getting to close to the end of our time. How about a couple more questions? Very different.
Cable sushi, you can't pick up. They're under because you could cut yourself on it naturally. I call it sushi. It looked like cable sushi.
Sushi, people call them cookies too, which I like.
And they do have a
It's
little
under
minimal,
glass. You can see it really
Yeah.
well. You just can't touch it
and they do have a little bit of lead in them as well. So we wouldn't want to
Yeah,
have
okay.
the public teaching those.
in case somebody licked them.
Yeah, no-
Participation
no
by the
looking.
tribes was another question in the Seacoast Reliability Project. And then I have a question about districts. So tribes, Brooke, is that for you?
Sure. No, there was no tribal participation in SRP.
I would like to add though with tribes though, like I said, just because there aren't any federally recognized tribes in New Hampshire, there still are a number of tribes outside like the Narragansett and others who like to participate sometimes. And there are also a lot of groups who have tribal affiliations within the state that are not necessarily recognized as federal tribes, Abenaki and others, and they are still given the status of participating as a consulting party. They're not though risen to the level of like when a federal tribe participates, they're like acting as a federal agency themselves. They're like federal to federal, but we still give, considerable concern to other tribes that are not federally recognized in our state for projects.
And I know there was engagement in Northern Pass. I don't have a great sense of sort of process to process what that interaction looks like, but certainly it's part of the 106 history and part of its future as well. Charlotte Hitchcock asked about new historic districts, and she just wondered about the status. Are they just officially considered eligible, or have they actually gone to the designation next step process?
Well, for this particular project and for most Section 106 projects, they usually are not taken to the next steps of actually being listed to the National Register, because for 106, they just have to be declared as eligible. But there have been certain projects, including the Northern Pass, where community folks have been interested in trying to then take that next step and actually list it to the National Register, which can be a benefit for a number of reasons, grants and other things. We haven't done that implementation yet, but because it does cost money, unfortunately. But that has happened in the past on projects where it's then moved on and become listed to the National Register.
And sources of money, and we're always happy to talk to people about that. And I'm sure your office has ideas too. I mean, we've seen great local fundraising around that, where people in the district see the mutual honor and benefit of that, or there are a few programs around the state that might give grant money.
Our certified local government program, which I mentioned 25 communities, and fortunately both Durham and Newington are certified local governments. They have a beeline access to getting money to prepare National Register nominations by hiring professionals. I know Lynn's done that, and other professionals have done that for some communities in our CLG towns.
Yeah. There's a big question about dams. You know what I might do is I'm just going to offer a little bit of wrap, and then why don't we have anybody who can stay on, let's stay on for another 5 or 10 minutes. Okay. Just, I know I want to be sensitive to people's time. So I would say before we totally end, but for anybody who needs to go, just thank you for participating. The New Hampshire Preservation Alliance will send a follow-up email out to everybody who participated. And I've been keeping a little list of links that we can provide as part of that. To Emmett, the great online resource that the the Division of Historical Resources has that was mentioned a couple times, the GHR review and compliance page, the Citizens Guide to Section 106 that Nadine also mentioned. There'll also be a really short survey, really helpful to us if you fill that out. Love you to be a member, supporter of the Preservation Alliance if you're not already. And we have a great lineup of other programs like this and a big set of programs for old house and barn owners coming up soon. So for those who have to sign off, I'll say goodbye and thank you. For those who can stay on, panelists, why don't we try to answer a couple of more questions? Is that okay?
Sure.
Good.
Yeah.
So we talked about designating National Register Historic District. Explain the process when two federal agencies have jurisdiction. For example, the Highway Administration and the USACE.
That's a great question. Usually one agency is determined to be the actual lead to take the primary role under Section 106. But then sometimes as well, the second agency may want to conduct their own Section 106, because I'd mentioned at the beginning that different agencies view that process a little differently than others. So some agencies are very comfortable with a group like the Federal Highway Administration or DOE doing most of the work and then just utilizing the comments that they've received for their 106 consultation. But others like to do some additional work or that on their own. So, but usually there is one lead group that sort of takes that role.
Okay. And dam removal and restoration projects, I know, are a complicated and important element of Section 106 work. Do you want to talk a little bit sort of how your office looks at that, Nadine? And I know you're at all different places with all different kinds of resources around the state in that property typology.
Well, I've been there for 15 years, and when I first started, dams were really always on the forefront, and they continue to be. And Edna Feitner, who was our archaeologist for many years, had tried to work tirelessly on the identification of dams and helping other agencies, especially DES, recognize that dams are significant usually. And then when they're removed, it's not only the dam that's changed, but the setting changes, the impoundment is lost. Memories of folks are lost often, and it just seems relentless that these dam projects keep coming through, because there tends to be money at the federal level for removing the dams, but there doesn't tend to be money for repairing the dams. LCHIP has given some money for that for some nonprofits and town-owned dams, and that's been great. And we hope to see more of that. I think in Union, the dam there, Drew Mill, might be searching for that, and we hope that's successful. So we just continue to fight the Oyster River Dam, which is significant in and of itself, and as part of the Durham Historic District is under attack, and there's been some great public involvement, and we just hope that people can stay involved, because when there's more involvement, that speaks to the agency and makes them take note and do some hard thinking.
Good. Yeah, we're working on several dam projects right now, but I'm here on the mill pond. Thank you.
Yep. So a specific question about the kinds of federal permits. I think this is specifically related to the Seacoast Reliability Project. What was the trigger, I guess, for this under 106? You want to just mention that again, Brooke?
Sure. It ended up being an individual permit from the Army Corps of Engineers.
Okay. I think that answered the question. Is there a separate document that exists for the creation of the cable district and what that entails? I think.
Yeah, there's an inventory form that the folks did that's really detailed, and that would be on our Emmett system. Emmett is a subscription system because we have to make it available on the cloud, and it costs money. But during COVID, because folks cannot come into our office, there is some more accessibility. So you want to check in with Tanya Kraychek at our office. You can get her email on our website. And I think that you can tool around in Emmett for a little while and see if you like it. And then when COVID ends, you may have to put a subscription in, but that document would be on there, and there's some great information there. And also what's cool about it, Lynn mentioned that it was primarily for the streetcar lines and things like that. There's some other work that DOT had done recently in Hampton in one of the neighborhoods that talks a lot about the creation of Hampton Beach and how it was really a destination spot like Canopy Lake was for the trolley or streetcar. And so there's a lot of connected history if you look at different communities and different inventory forms. Lynn, did you want to add
Oh,
something?
just that I think the hair document would be available through hair online. And if anybody's really desperate, I can figure something out. But yes.
Maybe we can offer those links too. And a resource question, Lynn, you talked about all that winnowing. Were there any historic bridges impacted by the project? So
No.
But that's a classic, just like dams, right? That,
We do a lot of bridges, but they're
projects
not for this
all the
project.
time. Yeah. Federal funds in those.
Jennifer, one person's asked, if Lydia's asked if we can make this available not only as the recorded session, but a PDF that could be emailed. That should be pretty easy, don't you think?
Sure, making the PowerPoint available, you mean?
As a PDF. We
Happy to
can
do
save it
that.
as a PDF. It's much easier to email out because it's not so big.
Sure. Did I miss anything else? I was trying to track this. It was a mix of so longs and thank yous along with some great questions.
I think there's one good question about historic bridges, and I don't think that this particular project impacted them, but certainly in the Seacoast, we are working with DOT right now on some really big, very significant bridges and trying to come up with mitigation and working with the towns and folks even at the national level for the General Sullivan Bridge and the Hampton Seabrook Bridge and bridges and, the Bascule up and down bridges. So, and those are so significant and they're really the last of its kind, their kinds. And it's sad, but sometimes it's hard to maintain bridges that are obsolete from a transportation system approach. It's hard.
So a lot of challenges, but I think we're also leaving Historic Bridge Foundation is a great source. Wonderful. Thank you for that comment, Kate. I think I'll wrap and say that there certainly are challenges that we're all bumping to every day, every week in terms of potential challenges for historic resources. But I think this session has really given us some optimism about win-win solutions and practical ways to engage. So I really want to thank the panelists for putting together a great program and for everybody who listened in and participated and engaged in this important topic. So long, stay well. Thanks for participating.
Thanks for hosting.